Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Fire 5 at Phoenix. I'm Zoe Thompson, Phoenix Life and Wellbeing Coaching. If you are joining us for the first time, one guest, one topic, 5 questions, and lots of conversation to follow. The topic this month is the mind and body connection, and my guest today is Kerry Seymour. So before we get into the questions that I have not yet seen, Kerry, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Fab, thank you, Zoe. Thank you for inviting me on. So I'm Kerry Seymour and I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist with Inspire to Change. At the moment, I'm based in South Gloucestershire, North Bristol technically, but kind of on the border, and I work with people who are struggling with stress, anxiety and overwhelm. They're feeling completely exhausted by it. I help them to take back that control, get them understanding how their brain works so they can get it working with them rather than against them, and move forward in the direction that they want to move forward in. So that mind body connection is a big part of what we do.
I love it, and I love the fact that we, even just in some of those key words that you talked about there, is exactly what I do through coaching, but you do through hypnotherapy. And I love the fact that people who are struggling with feeling stuck, frustrated, overwhelmed, anxiety, depression, all of these real life challenges get to choose which way of working, which type of solution, or to which type of therapy works best for them. So I'm sure we will talk more about how you do that as this conversation goes on. And you got 5 questions for me today on mind-body connection.
Yeah, I've prepared 5 questions. I've not been too mean, I don't think. Shall I start with the first one?
Yeah, go for it.
Ready? Okay, so the first one, so watch the previous episode, so I'm not going to ask you what the mind-body connection is, but I thought I'd ask, how important do you think it is to understand the mind-body connection, and what do you think is the best way to raise awareness generally in kind of the general public, so that that's something that they're mindful of?
Good question. Yeah, and I think people know, but they don't know, if that makes sense. I think people have that sort of general understanding, but I don't always hear that people realize how much the way you think affects the way that you feel, and the way that you feel affects the way that you think, and that it goes both ways. And I think the best example for me is that your body will respond to how you think and what you tell it, how you tell it to respond. So even if we were to sit here now and say, oh, I feel really nervous, oh, I'm so nervous about this live, even if you're not, you will start to feel, your body will start to respond with what, that adrenaline will start to rush, your heart will start to race, your breathing will become more shallow. So there's a physical response to what you're thinking. And I think one of the best examples I like to use is, watching horror films. It's not real. That you're not in there's no risk to your safety, but it feels the physical response when those things happen in the films, they're very real. That's a very real physical response. And so, understanding that your body will respond to what you are preparing it for. So if you think, if you think, oh, that really scares me, or that I'm really worried about this, even just using that kind of language, whether it's spoken or that internal language of talking about, I'm worried about this, this scares me, or this frightens me, even just using that language will invoke that response.
Yeah,
and then
just reframing it sometimes, isn't it?
Sorry, say again.
Just reframing it sometimes, like the example of what you're using there about maybe coming on this call going, oh, I feel so nervous, actually saying I feel so excited.
Yeah,
it's a really feeling, but it completely changes your reaction to it, doesn't it?
And I think that's always a great question for me in coaching, when people talk about something that they are worried about, is, but what excites you about this? Mm-hmm. What elements of this excite you? This is just having a conversation with somebody about, teenagers at the moment going through their exams. It's a pretty nerve-wracking experience, and quite often for young people, this is the first time they are experiencing this kind of pressure or this kind of scenario. So even just having that conversation of, okay, yeah, what is it that you're nervous about? Okay, but what excites you about, being able to go in and put everything that you've been learning into practice, or being able, this being part of you being able to take the next step. And, the exam itself might still be nerve-wracking, but there are elements of it that probably are more positive, and getting people to focus around that. So I think the mind-body connection is huge, and even, we talked about it in the last couple of episodes, of changing your physical state can help change your mental state. So I think it goes one way and it goes back again in the opposite direction. What was the second part of the question? How do we increase that awareness?
Yeah, increasing awareness of how important it is just to be mindful of it.
I think it's becoming more common to talk about it now. I think you hear people talking about it a lot more, podcasts, different interviews. There's a lot more, I think a lot more people who've got a platform that are using that platform to be able to talk about it. But I think just in general, just talking about it at home, or talking about it with your children or with your partner, or talking about it in work, even just having those conversations, there is a lot of stigma attached to these things. There's a lot of naivety, would that be the right word? Probably not the right word. Just people just don't know. So just even having these conversations helps increase awareness. So I think we can all talk about our experiences, can't we? We can all share our experiences, but I think even just being more open about how we think and how we feel, and how that's all connected.
Definitely. And I think there's still an element of mind-body connection. I think people still view it as maybe quite like a woo-woo thing. Like they don't really understand why there would be that connection. But I think the more we share the science behind that, I'm quite geeky with stuff like that. I like to know the science behind it, particularly the neuroscience elements. And I think when people understand actually it's not a woo-woo thing, when not coming at it from that angle, there is a genuine scientific connection, then I think it makes it people are more willing to talk about it, I think, rather than being closed-minded about it.
Yeah, it is science-based, isn't it? It is very real. So I think just helping I think it's one of those things that you can prove to people quite quickly, isn't it? Because you can say, well, try this. And you can, even if we sat here now and said, right, if you're listening into this or you're watching this, start telling yourself that you're really worried about something that's happening today, and you will start to feel that response. So it's that proof is there very quickly to get people to understand how powerful that connection is. And in the same way, talk about something that you're really excited about, or we all know, when a certain music song comes on and you immediately feel that kind of whatever emotion is attached to that song, whether it's happiness or calm or excitement or something that you remember from that piece of music. I mean, these are things that I think people generally accept. So if you just expand that into how you can use that across all of the different emotions and all of the different physical states, then I think people understand it a little bit. They recognize it, they accept it. It's just expanding how you can use that, like you said, instead of not being aware so that it works against you, of being more aware, increasing your awareness and understanding so that you can use it to your advantage.
Absolutely. I think with what you were saying there, it's making me think actually of how it increases our connection to other people, because something I do with clients in our first session is to ask them about a time when they were quite high on a happiness scale out of 10, so a 9 or a 10. They'll explain to me about their wedding day, about the most amazing holiday they had, whatever that really happy day is. And I get that listening to why it's so good. I get that, oh wow, and it's not even my memory or my experience, but as a shared connection, even over Zoom, actually, you still get that same response. So
I think this for me is what's important, and just to build on what you were just saying there, is that we don't and I always find this really tough to explain, but we don't recall the emotion, do we? We recall the label of the emotion and then how we then feel that emotion in real time. So if we're thinking about a past event, we're not recalling the emotions from that day. What we're recalling is the label of that was a happy day, or that was, and then we are feeling those emotions in this present moment. So just thinking about these things can help us to feel very differently in the now. I read something, I think it was this morning, about how, being tickled, it's impossible to be grumpy when you're being, or angry when you're being tickled, or when you're laughing. It's a very quick emotional state switch, which is really being led by your physical state. So I think,
or even smiling, even when you're not happy, produces the serotonin in the brain, doesn't it? Which makes you go, oh, yeah, actually, I feel a little bit better.
Yeah, all makes a difference. So I know when I had solution focused hypnotherapy to give up smoking, and I remember that was one of the suggestions that we talked about, was when I wanted to have a cigarette, I would just sit and smile and just release, or go and have a conversation with somebody who I knew would make me smile, or listen or watch something to make me smile, to feel better without using that sort of external source to be able to do that. And that still works for me now. It's just recalling funny moments, or being able to do that to change how you feel, and that sort of very natural response. So
yeah, fantastic. I think that's probably leading us nicely into the next question. Shall I fire that at you?
Yes.
So the next question then is, what do you do, Zoe, to stay aware or be mindful of your own mind-body connection? And what benefits do you feel that this has brought to you personally?
Definitely much more aware of it now. It's very hard not to be when you work in this world, don't you? So I think I've learned over the years of being very protective over my space and who I surround myself with and how I feel in certain situations. We was talking to somebody this morning about, being an introvert. I know that I love being with people, but my battery drains very quickly. So knowing that I am likely to hit a limit, and that some situations will drain my battery a lot quicker than others, of making sure that I have that protected space to be able to recharge that. Simple things like in between clients, I will make sure that there's a big enough gap so that I can go and do something else that breaks my state. So I'm very lucky. I work with a real variety of clients, and sometimes after sessions, I'll feel really energized and feel really kind of lifted and vibrant. But my next client, I need to go, still need to kind of get back into that neutral state to go into the next client. So sometimes it's a very positive state, but I just need to bring it into that neutral state. So I think I'm very aware of my energy levels and how that, like you said, you can mirror that over and people can pick that up from you, but also being able to hold that neutral state to not influence other people's energy levels as well is really important. We talked in the last couple of episodes about the importance for me for being active and exercising, but also actually just sitting in silence with a book has the same, again, it's knowing what my state is and knowing what state I want to be in, and then using a variety of things to change from A to B. And just being much more aware of it, paying much more attention, rather than I think in the past would have just ignored it. I find it fascinating now to think that before I understood all of this, I was working police control room, so 60 members of staff on the floor, all answering phones, all talking to people, an incredible energy in that room. But I couldn't understand why. I just find it so exhausting. So I just assumed it was shift work. It was the fact, the pressure of the job, the pressure of decision making, working, having teams of staff, all of those things. But now I understand that actually, as an introvert, that is why I would come home and just want to shut myself away into complete silence rather than sitting in a room with other people. So now I understand it. it means that I can pay much more attention to it, but take the right course of action to neutralize it or lift it up or bring it down to whatever's needed.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think it's really key, isn't it, to understand actually what works for you, and you know the situations that are going to cause that stress, whether it's mental stress or physical stress, and then you've got that toolkit of stuff that you know is going to really help, whether that's going outside to exercise or curling up in a chair with a book. Active rest, we like to call that.
Active rest.
To change.
And I'd used active rest, certainly in my training days of, the days where you weren't training, but you still needed to be moving and you still needed to keep things ticking over. But yeah, you're, absolutely what you're saying there in finding something that works for you. And if you're an extrovert, my ways of working and making it work for me aren't probably going to work for you. You're going to want to phone a friend. You're going to want to be able to go and be with people. So it is just working out what that is, and making sure that you know what works for you, and you can maybe learn and understand it from other people, maybe influenced, but you don't have to do what you see somebody else doing. It is really just about finding the things that work best for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's sometimes some pressure, isn't there, of those perceived go-tos for kind of letting off steam, and that it's not the same for everybody, is it?
No, and I think one thing that I would really point out is that I think people worry that wanting to be on your own, wanting to sit in quiet, not wanting to see other people, quite often are what people would perceive to be signs of depression or low mood or social anxiety, whereas actually they can be a very positive coping mechanism. So I think it is just about understanding, am I doing this and I feel better when I do this, or am I doing this and I don't feel any better or potentially feel worse? Because it is understanding this, is this a positive coping strategy for me? Is this something that works well for me, or is it a sign that I'm not coping and that this isn't working? So I think, I've spoken to people who've been really quite concerned about the fact that they just want time out and they don't want to leave the house and they don't want to speak to people for short periods of time. But that's because they're an introvert and they're recharging, and then that's it. A couple of hours later, they're back out there. And I think I think people worry because they hear those sort of behaviours being attributed to depression and social anxiety. And so it's understanding when it's a concern and when it's a positive strategy, coping strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's definitely something around how you're using that time as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just because you're on your own doesn't mean, like reading a book is being productive, or doing some craft, or whatever it might be, or working in the garden, or exercising on your own. It's how you're using that time as well, isn't it? Whereas I suppose if you're under the duvet all day for days on end, then that's perhaps when it reaches.
And I think it's paying attention to how you feel before and how you feel after. Because if you're not feeling any better as a result of it, then it's not a positive coping strategy. So if it is helping you feel better and it is helping you feel energized, then that's good. If it's not, then look at alternatives, and look at other ways that actually maybe you do need to be with people. Maybe you need to sit and talk, ring a friend, or feel like you're back out there in with people, and that actually helps energize you and pick you up. So I think it is very much paying attention to the before and the after, and the before and the after will be different for different people.
Yeah, and it's knowing those signs as well, isn't it? The signs for you that know you need to do something differently. You look after yourself. That's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so my next question, looking forward to your answer to this one. So, what would you say is the single most effective thing you can do to look after both your physical and mental health?
Just one thing.
Just one thing.
This is the thing that catches me out. Asking me to speak for less than 2 minutes, or asking me for one thing. They have these questions.
Say one thing, and then you can explain it in 10 minutes.
Yeah, definitely the questions that catch me out every time. Okay, the answer that popped into my head was sleep.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the answer that popped into my head. Just because I think it just has, I mean, my 3 would be sleep, nutrition, and activity.
Yeah.
So rest and sleep. So not just sleep, but the rest and sleep, nutrition, and activity. Those would be my top 3. I think they are the golden thread to everything. And if you take care of those, then the things that we have and can influence and control get taken care of. Out of those 3, I do think, sleep is the one that jumped out for me, just because it impacts our immune system, it impacts our energy levels. There's just so much, isn't there, that's attached to sleep that has been, episodes in itself talking about sleep and rest. I think in today's society, I think we're very much about activity. I think that's almost a given now. People know they need to be more active, or they need to be active. I think people are much more tuned into the importance of nutrition, but the importance of rest and slowing down and having enough sleep is almost being overlooked in the process. Yeah. So you hear people trying to squeeze in all of these things that they need to do or they should be doing, and sleep gets neglected. I think that has a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there has been a culture of sleep is for the weak. Or I haven't got enough time in the day. Oh, I'll just get up
days off,
or I'll stay up later. And I think it's really underestimated, the importance of sleep, and that's definitely the one I would go for, because I think I could completely agree, nutrition and activity and movement through the day. But I think if you haven't had that good night's sleep, you're much less likely to be able to maintain good nutrition or that good, positive level of activity. And then so sleep, definitely I would go for.
That lack of sleep or lack of quality sleep can undermine activity and nutrition, so it almost has the power over your activity or nutrition. But you think it just runs through everything, doesn't it? But I've said to people before, I know that if I start to feel run down, that it's normally a sign that I need to slow down and I need to get more sleep. And if I just focus on those 2 things, everything else starts to fall into place. So I do set an alarm to slow myself down in the evenings and remind myself, okay, this is now, you need to switch off. I do have a do not disturb on my phone so that I'm not distracted and I'm not picking the phone up. I read before I sleep because I know that winds me down much better than watching anything on TV. There's all of these things, but just to protect my sleeping time. Now, I'm not going to have a conversation with you right now. And actually, I think I'm hearing a lot more people saying, "Oh, no, I'm off to bed now, but we'll finish this conversation tomorrow." I think people are being more protective around their sleep. But this whole, no rest days, no days off, well. If you're an early bird and you want to get up at 5 a.m, because that's when you're most energized, great. If you do that, if you're a night owl and you'll have more energy in the evening, great. Again, what works for you? There's people trying to do both. There's people trying to get up at 5 a.m. and then still feel that they should be going at 9, 10 o'clock at night. No, your day either starts early and finishes early, or it starts late and finishes late. But it is just about working for you. And I think there's lots of, again, social media influence elements that people see one person doing one thing, they see one person doing another, and then they try to do both. And it's like, no,
which one's right?
Pick one. Pick elements of what you think might work for you, play about with it, tweak it until you find something that works, and then go with that. I don't set an alarm. Very rarely do I have to set an alarm, because my sleep cycle is fairly routine. But I know that when I wake up, I'm like, okay, well, I'm awake, so that must mean I've, had enough sleep. And actually, I know I can just, as long as I get that wind down, I think that's the key, isn't it? Is that slowing down in the evening and not kind of still going at 90 miles an hour when your head hits the pillow like an emergency stop. It is about that slowing down and getting your body ready for sleep.
Yeah.
So
and your mind as well. I think when we've got a cram-packed day, if our mind has had no chance at all to process anything throughout the day, it's going to do it right as soon as our head hits the pillow, and then that's when we stay awake for hours, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good, again, a balance of both. You can't relax into sleep if your mind is too busy, and you can't do it if you haven't given your body a chance to wind down. And I think really protecting that time to be physically restored and mentally restored, I think is massive. It has trailed behind nutrition and activity, but I think it is starting to catch up now. But that would be the one that I would prioritise if I had to.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you've picked out the same one. So, and I just, I think there's so much. And talking about, just emptying your brain out before you go off to sleep. If you've had a really busy day and you haven't had time to just kind of sit and process if it needs to be processed, or pass it through and dump it if it doesn't need to be held on to. And I think that's why journaling comes in quite handy for a lot of people, or keeping a notebook by the side of the bed of, when that something pops in, right, I'm just going to write that down. I know then I've written it down, so I'll think about it, worry about it tomorrow, and just have that time. I know I've talked about it before, but that positive ending to the day is so important too, of not sitting in bed and worrying about all the things that haven't, or percolating or overthinking all of the things that haven't gone well that day. So it's very easy to do. It's a very easy habit to fall into. So in the same way that you've learned that habit, you can learn something different. And so just getting into that routine of, before you go to bed, going, right, what were 3 things that went really well today? And so you go into bed in that much more positive headspace, which helps you to relax rather than the overthinking stress state of overthinking and worrying and all of those things, of just kind of thinking, actually, no, these are the things that went really well today. This was what made me smile. This was, what I enjoyed most today. What, again, find things that work for you that help you to relax.
Yeah. And
then you just go into that sleep state so much easier.
Yeah, definitely. And as you know, that's something that I would talk about a lot as well. Always reflecting on what's been good. It's not every day has been a good day, but there's always something good in every day. And it doesn't matter how small it is, whether it's the fact that actually I enjoyed the fact that I had a cup of tea in my Moana cup. You just recalling that, even though it's a teeny tiny thing, I think it's one of those things that can feel like such a simple practice, but actually the importance of doing it is huge, isn't it? Particularly before bed, because it helps you. It does help you to switch off. So
and interestingly, the other thing that I do, especially if I do feel that I'm still quite tense when I get into bed, is use some of the breathing and things that I learned when I had hypnotherapy to help me settle down. So, the breathing out for longer than you breathe in, holding that space at the top. So I use the positives from the day with my breathing. So I'll breathe because it doesn't take very much, but it's just that breathe in, what felt good today, and then as I breathe out, I just visualize any kind of stress or any sort of negativity from the day, just exhaling, and off it goes, and kind of emptying out the day before I go into the next one. Now that does sound a little bit woo-woo, I get that, but that really, the breathing, if you just want to focus on the physical side, the breathing and remembering some funny things that have happened, or things that have felt good, or things that have gone well, that makes all the difference for me. And just being able to switch off anything that's churning, so I can get a good night's sleep.
Well, it's that, I'm sure you know this, but it's that out breath, isn't it, that signals to our brain that we're not in any danger. So our cortisol naturally drops from that really long out breath.
Yeah.
And again, so we link it, it's all linked back to the science behind it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that the breathing technique I normally talk about the most, because it's the simplest one, is the 7-11 one. So it's breathing in for 7, breathing out for 11. 11 is a really long out breath. But easy to remember, and just knowing that actually that out breath is really what's doing the work, even without the realization of getting rid of the stress. Extra bonus if you do that as well. It's just really powerful, and it's such a simple thing to be able to work into your daily routine.
And it's the out breath that I feel myself sort of sinking into the mattress. And it's that one of my favorite feelings is that fuzzy feel just before you fall asleep. I wish I could bottle that kind of ultimate relaxed state just before you drop off to sleep. So if anyone knows how to bottle that feeling.
Fantastic, lovely. I'm glad we agree on that one.
Yeah, definitely on the same page there.
Yeah, right. I've got a really meaty one for you next.
Ooh, okay.
So this is really around kind of mental health and physical health and the interaction there. So the question is, which areas of healthcare do you think are most prone to that disconnect between the mind-body connection? And what changes would you like to see in the healthcare system regarding that?
You weren't lying when you said it was a meaty question, were you?
Yeah.
I wonder whether, I think the thing that again springs to my mind as you ask the question is we've got lots of different departments that take ownership for different parts or areas or types of health, and it's that integrated approach. I don't know if that would be the right word, but just, quite often all of these things do tend to work together. But it's, if you've got complex medical issues, you have to see one consultant and department, another consultant and a department. And whilst they might share notes, it's not anybody that kind of takes ownership for that holistic health approach. It's a bit like coaching. We've just been having this conversation with somebody this morning. For me, it's a bit like coaching. There are coaches who specialize in particular challenges, and I think they absolutely have their place, because if you are having a particular challenge, it is good to have a coach or somebody, a professional who works in that arena, who understands, is up to date with information, who reads, researches, lives and breathes this particular challenge. So when you go to that person, that they are up to date with anything that's going on. And I think that's really important. The type of people that I work with tend to have lots of things going on in lots of different areas. And that's who I enjoy working with. I like working with the person and working with that individual to help them with lots of different tools and strategies that they can apply into lots of different areas. So it's a very different approach, but for me, it's working with the whole person so that they can work through lots of different challenges. So I think if you apply that sort of similar scenario into healthcare, I think there are certain things where you need to go to a specialist, somebody who lives and breathes that particular kind of challenge, who has the most up-to-date techniques, procedures, treatments. But then there are other people who have a number of challenges that need a more holistic approach of working with either one professional that works through lots of different areas, or professionals who work together to help that. And I think that's where sometimes it's not segregated, but I think it needs to be more integrated in being able to work together. I think mental health is huge, but quite often some of the physical health elements are as a result of mental health and vice versa. And actually having people who can work with all of that and work with the person on lifestyle, nutrition, sleep, rest, stress levels, anxiety, depression, coping mechanisms, coping tools, whether it's talking therapy, counselling, looking back, whether it's talking therapy, coaching, moving forward, that integrated, more holistic approach, I think would be more beneficial for people who are really struggling to work through the things that are impacting them.
Yeah, definitely.
And I feel like,
yeah, no, it did. It was a tricky question that I threw in there, and I think physical health, I mean, rightly so, in emergency situations, physical health is often prioritised, sometimes the detriment of mental health. And in that emergency situation, of course, physical health is the most important thing. But I think so many elements where the mental impact isn't really considered. I think there's areas of healthcare that do it quite well. I think maybe palliative care probably has got a better awareness around that kind of. But the thing that's come up for me recently around this, which is I think what fueled this question, was around perinatal mental health. And I've had a lot of conversations recently with women who've had miscarriages or baby losses. They've had subsequent pregnancies, and all of the focus has been on their physical well-being, with no support for their mental well-being. I think it's such a key area of mind-body connection, isn't it? It's just, I think it's just areas that need a lot more work, or just that understanding of when people are going in for operations, they need to be in good physical shape as best as they can, but actually they also need to have that mental health support, and just to have, even if that's not necessarily being under a psychiatrist, but whether it's just having some knowledge and tools and awareness around what they can do in recovery, particularly to kind of avoid anxiety and depression that can come from being in pain, being inactive, and all of that stuff. I think it's an area that I'm finding out I'm feeling quite passionate about.
And I think it's just so important, isn't it? And I think exactly what you're saying is that the physical element will quite often need to take priority in terms of like that time, being time critical. But there's so much that, mental health is a golden thread. You can't, even a physical health is going to impact your mental health. So as an example, if you break a bone, there is still a mental health element that runs through that, because how did you break the bone? Was there an accident? So do you need some support to talk through how that happened? Or is there an impact on your lifestyle? If you have broken your leg and now you can't be active, do you need to adjust your nutrition? Do you need to find ways to be able to rest and sleep in a different way? There's so many elements to this that actually all kind of come into play, and we'll treat the main bit that needs to be treated, but not always take into account everything else that's going on. And again, I think that's treating the whole person rather than treating the problem at source. And so many times the physical problem isn't at the source, is not physical, the source is mental. So I think we talked about this with Sarah last week, about how back pain and different pain comes through, whereas it might be stress, anxiety, because we hold the tension, we're not releasing that tension, we hold that stress, the chronic stress as opposed to the acute stress. All of these things have a physical impact, and medication has its place, but again, there's that treating the whole person and the whole thing that's going on. And I think what you mentioned there about the miscarriage, all of these things, there's bereavement there, there's trauma there, there's it's going to impact relationships, it's going to impact children, that that are already in that family unit. It's going to impact people in the family unit. It's going to impact conversations and lifestyle and all of these other things, that it's not just about treating the one thing. It's about treating the impact that one thing has.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think putting people's mental resilience on par with their physical recovery as well, I think is really, really important. And what you were saying there made me think of the documentary. I can't remember his name. Is it Roman Kemp?
Yes.
His documentary that he did on his friend's suicide. There was a part of the show where he asked his dad if he'd ever had any mental health. And immediately his response was, "Oh, no, I haven't ever had any mental health issues." And then he thought, and then he went, "Oh, apart from that time I had, I can't remember what it was, an operation or some sort of injury." And then he said, "Oh, I was probably depressed for about a year after that." So I thought that again, that's interesting, that his immediate gut response was no, but then he reflected and said, actually, when I had this physical trauma, it then created this mental health trauma. But didn't necessarily connect it as a mental health issue because it was as a result of the physical.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. People's perception of mental health they see as coming from out of the blue with no cause, no physical reason. But when physical health, impacts mental health, I think people don't necessarily see it as a mental health thing. They see it as, oh, that's because I had the operation.
Yeah, it's almost a side effect of a physical problem rather than a challenge in itself.
If it's triggered by that kind of some sort of physical issue or trauma, but at the same time you can address it as you would with any other type of depression. So I think it's interesting that people create that disconnect in their mind of what mental health means. I still think there's that image, isn't there, of mental health, you need to be in a psychiatric hospital. So yeah, it's a really interesting area, I think.
And I think that's some of the stigma that I think we still need some work and some progress on, and that understanding the difference between your mental health and well-being and then mental illness, and understanding the differences between both. And I think just really importantly, what you can do as that are preventative measures. And I think that's probably part of the health and well-being approach, isn't it, of as much as possible putting energy into preventative tools and strategies and routines and things that work for people, as well as being able to treat when it becomes illness, of being able to treat it. But I think there's almost, I think it feels sometimes it's a losing battle in both the preventative and the treatment, because waiting lists and things like that. But I think there's lots we can all do on a day-to-day basis that we can have control over, that we have to choose to make it a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking on the flip side there as well, I've, like, as you know, Zoe, I've worked in inpatient forensic mental health services, and one of the massive challenges in inpatient services is the physical health of patients, because patients quite often put on weight and are very active. And again, we know how putting on weight and not being very active in turn impacts mental health, and then it becomes that vicious cycle of physical and mental health, and you can't prioritize one out the other because it just doesn't work. So yeah.
And I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it, is that you've almost got to, it almost feels like the way people talk about healthcare, certainly in this country, is it's mental health and physical health rather than where they meet, which is more often than not. So I think there is a place to have specialists in fields for certain treatments, but I would like to see more of that, more holistic, looking at mental and physical health and well-being in one, rather than always, oh, it's mental health or it's physical health, and pushing, it's that almost kind of pushing people down that pigeonhole, isn't it, of, well, it's one, it has to be one or the other. Well, actually a lot of the time it's a good mix of both,
completely intertwined as well. Yes,
can't be separated.
Yeah,
good question.
you. So after that meaty one, I've got a really flippant one to end on. So this is inspired by the fact that both of my children love a would you rather question. So this is a would you rather question.
Ooh, okay.
You could go quite deep, but it was quite flippant. So answer it as you feel. So Zoe, would you rather have excellent mental health and mediocre physical health, or excellent physical health and mediocre mental health?
Ooh, this kind of ties in with that question, isn't it? Of when you're old, do you still want to have that mental capacity but not be able to do anything, or would you rather? Oh, it's flippant, but it's tough. I don't know if I'd rather not know. Would I rather not know?
Let me answer the question.
Yeah, it is a tough one, isn't it? It is. It is. I know it's flippant and it's said tongue in cheek, but I think it is. I think having had, when you get to elderly family members, I've had elderly family members with Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's, and I wanted to say it's not. I've had grandparents with Alzheimer's, and I think that's tough because they seem quite happy in their own little world, but it's something that impacts the family. But they were both sort of physically quite well. I think I would choice, if I could be blissfully unaware in my own little bubble and my own little world, I think that's where I would go, which some people might tell you I'm already there, just existing blissfully in my own little bubble.
Why not? There at the moment, so that's fine. Yeah, it's interesting. Like when I wrote it, I thought, oh, well, what would I choose? And I purposely chose not to go for the huge extreme. So having that either excellent or kind of the mediocre. And I think for me, I'd have to choose excellent mental health, because I think to have excellent physical health and mediocre mental health, I think would be more difficult to live with for me.
Yeah, I have to say, in my experience, I think poor mental health, mental illness has been more debilitating for people than poor physical health. I think when you have a good mental health, you find ways to cope with your poor physical health, and you find ways to make the best of what you have and what you can do. And I do think that is where mental health, mental resilience, mental well-being really comes into play. And I think if I was to reflect on people who I've known who have really struggled with their own mental health, mental illness, that has been more debilitating than people that I know who have physical ailments or physical things that impact them on a day-to-day basis. So yes, whilst my initial answer was let me live blissfully unaware in my own little bubble, that's not the reality of poor mental health.
No. I think I compare it, actually, just as you were talking then, I compare it to the time when I've struggled with mental health, which is with postnatal depression. Actually, recovering physically from birth, it's not necessarily pleasant, is it? But it's relatively short amount of time, and you kind of get. But actually, if you gave me a choice between the physical effects of having just had a baby and that mental 6 months of postnatal depression, I would absolutely choose. I'd even give birth again, to be honest. I'd give her the pain of birth and the recovery over the 6 months of postnatal depression. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I think it's one of those questions, isn't it? The more you think about it, the more you reflect on the answer. And I think, like you, I think good mental health gives you the strength and resilience you need that to be able to cope with poor mental health. That doesn't necessarily work the other way around. So yeah, I think I'm also on the same page as you with that one. I would pick good mental health.
Yeah, it's flippant, but it is tricky, isn't it? And I did purposely not go for too extreme on the negative end of the scale. I thought we'll stick with food.
It's a good question. It's just having you go to what you know, don't you? You go to your own experiences, and you go to who you know who have had similar experiences, and think, well, what would I do in that situation? And you compare that to your own experiences, and it's a good, very thought-provoking last question.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head though, isn't it? It's all about that ability to cope with whatever's going on in your life, and mental resilience is key for that, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Great last question. Great 5 questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
It wasn't nerve-wracking at all. It was exciting.
Yes.
No, it's and interesting. You're you're the third guest in, so we've still got one more in this topic. But I love the fact that, like I said to you when we talked about doing this, is that the guests get to bring the questions, which means it always brings that slightly different dynamic on a topic, which is a huge topic, but it brings that different dynamic as we get to talk about it from your perspective and things that you've experienced rather than things that I might choose to talk about on this topic. So brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. So we will put this out across all of the usual channels. If you are listening, watching, like, subscribe. If we have talked about things today that you feel might help somebody please do feel free to share and pass this information on to them. My contact details are all there. We will put the links in so that you can contact Kerry. So if you would like to find more about the solution-focused hypnotherapy, or perhaps some of her work around the antenatal elements, that wouldn't be the right word, would it? But around antenatal treatments, therapies, Kerry, I know, will be more than happy to have a conversation with you and tell you more. Thank you very much, Kerry, for your time. Thank you very much for your time listening and watching, and we will be back with another episode. So one more to come on this topic next week. We'll see you soon. Thank you.